Good news! I came up with a way to start all my videos. Are you ready? Swampy salutations from this swamp hag. I'm a swamp hag. There's a stick on my hat. That actually makes sense because I am a swamp hag. Inside. If you are unfamiliar with my whole swamp hag concept, just go back a few videos. I think there's one literally called Swamp Hag. So I'm going to try to remember to say swampy salutations. It's so funny. I asked ChatGPT for help and it was not helpful for salutations, for greetings. But it did come up with a good sign off for me, or a version. I had to edit it to make it work, but you'll just have to wait to see what that's going to be. So I had surgery last week and I've been sitting around a lot. So I've had a lot of things to think about, and I had to actually think about what I was going to talk about today because I had so many brain things going on. So I wanted to show and tell this painting I got from my friend that I love. Look at it. Look at the cracking. I just love this texture. I don't know how well you can see it. Super cool, huh? So my friend has been working on this project. Got a calendar. Rory. Unnameable colors. This is basically, she's been painting these palettes for concepts that sort of describe a feeling that you don't really have a singular word for. So I'll give you a few examples because I have the calendar. So exciting. This one is actually my favorite one right here. Okay. So mine, this green one that I just showed you, is smoothing out the garments smoothing out the wrinkles in an old garment for the last time. That's the January one. So a couple other examples: strong memory changing over time, the increasing detritus in the crease of your favorite picnic blanket every time you unfold and refold it, the small unpredictable change in your favorite recipe every time you make it, the space between worn and new. This is a great one. I love that concept. Wait, where's my favorite one? Hang on. The strange journey of the love you leave behind. This is my favorite visually. I just think it's so cool. Somebody bought it before I could get my hands on it, so what are you gonna do? That's how original art works, you gotta buy it or somebody else is gonna buy it. And that's the end of the story. Anyway, so I absolutely love this project. And one of the reasons I love this project is because this concept, this idea of these unnameable feelings, in my opinion, is one of the primary goals of fiction. It's to give you, or the reader, or the watcher, I guess, if we're talking about TV shows or movies, these emotional experiences that you might not be able to necessarily identify with language. You might not be able to put a single word or even a group of words, right? A paragraph or chapter. Even I, as a writer, might not be able to identify precisely what emotional experience you are going to have when you read my book. But creating these emotional experiences is one of my goals as a writer. And I think is a really interesting thing to think about and talk about. So the thing that I told my friend when we were talking about this project that she was doing is that we have a term for that, sort of, in the writing world, and it's called universal fantasies. Now, the term universal fantasies is somewhat inaccurate, because most universal fantasies are not universal. But the term itself came from a book that was only published a couple of years ago, maybe 2021, 2020, I don't know, by T. Taylor, called, I don't know, Seven Figure Fiction. It was something like that. And so she talked about this concept of universal fantasies and how universal fantasies in fiction sell books. That, like, her whole point was, it was like a marketing, like how to write stories that sell better. But it's not really a new concept. The idea of like embedding emotional experiences into your fiction is not new. Donald Moss wrote a book called, I'm gonna forget the name of it. It's something about emotions, putting emotions in your work. um, a long time ago, being like 2010 or something. I don't know. And if you study plot structure at all, there tends to be a lot of discussion about these emotional experiences. I have a friend who refers to them as id triggers, which specifically are things that trigger the sort of subconscious part of self, and that causes you to engage in a story in an emotional, like deep subconscious, subjective way. But the thing that I think that T. Taylor's book did that was most valuable is really stoke the conversation in the writing community about these emotional experiences, what they are, how to create them, how they work, and what they mean. And so I have a lot of opinions because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And so I just wanted to share. I actually went and I Googled universal fantasies because I wanted to see what other people were saying about them. And surprise, surprise, my blog post was one of the top results in Google. I wrote a post about it. And outside of T. Taylor's stuff herself, the stuff that she's created, my stuff showed up. So I was like, okay, I guess a lot of people aren't talking about this on their own. So I want to talk about these emotional experiences, and I'm going to talk about them. My phone is vibrating. I want to talk about them sort of. I'm going to use the term universal fantasy, acknowledging that that's T. Taylor's term, but also acknowledging that what I'm talking about is a little bit different than what she actually talks about in her book. I have read the book, and I didn't like totally resonate with everything she said. So a lot of these ideas are mine, things that I came up with after jumping off of that book. I haven't taken any of her classes or anything, so I'm not trying to tread on her ideas at all. I was really happy because she sort of gave me like a jumping board to kind of start from to develop my own concepts. So mini emotional experiences, I could call them that, I guess. I'll have to think about it more. Okay, so the first thing that you have to talk about or think about when you're talking about these universal fantasies or these id triggers or mini emotional experiences is tropes. And the reason is because it's really important to understand what the difference between a trope and a universal fantasy is. So if you Google the word trope, there's two like primary definitions. The first is sort of a literary definition. It means like metaphor or allegory or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. The term trope has sort of evolved over time, and specifically in the indie writing community, and I think more broadly than that, like also in film and TV and stuff. It's come to mean more like the commonly seen structural pattern within a story. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you might be familiar with the chosen one trope. Chosen one trope. The chosen one trope, a really easy example, even though I'm not particularly a fan of the author, is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is the chosen one. He didn't get to choose, but there were prophecies about him, and he was, chosen to solve some like sort of macro world level issue. I think the chosen one trope is very common in sci-fi and fantasy. Another example of a trope might be the makeover trope. You see it in like Princess Diaries. You see it in Cinderella. Cinderella is probably the first occasion of the makeover trope, and it's when a character gets a makeover. They have some sort of external transformation that takes them from one version of themselves to another. Now, this is a trope because you see it commonly, you see it done repeatedly. It can be cliche if it's done exactly the same. But when someone talks about turning a trope on its head, a lot of times they're talking about taking a common trope, a commonly seen structural technique or plot device, and doing it differently. My favorite example of the makeover trope done with like turning it on its head is in Person of Interest, which is a TV show. And there's a sort of a makeover scene, but the characters, all the women who get the makeover, so to speak, start pulling guns out of various places, and or weapons, and it's pretty funny. So it takes this trope, right, which is like this external transformation of the way a person looks, and it gives a different vibe that really demonstrates these characters and who they are. And I think it's interesting, and I think it's funny, and I think it's really well done. I think that show is really well done in general. Okay, so that's a trope. It's a commonly seen structural technique that's repeated. But these mini emotional experiences, these universal fantasies, are different because they are the experience that the reader has or that the viewer has, right? They are an actual, literal emotional experience. The trope itself may deliver an emotional experience, but that emotional experience is something that exists within the person. And the writer and the creator, they can make choices in their writing, whether we're talking about structural choices or we're talking about word choice, or we're talking about grammar or genre. These choices can all help create an emotional experience for the reader, but that emotional experience happens within the reader. And so that's like the main difference is a trope is a delivery mechanism for this emotional experience, and the emotional experience is something that happens inside of the reader. So these, going back to my friend's pretty sweet artwork, these sort of the end result of what she is doing is she's creating art. She's creating a story, right, with these images, with this specific intention of describing a really specific emotional experience. So this is smoothing out the wrinkles in an old garment for the last time. That's a really specific emotional experience. And if you put your mind in that, like, it's like potent, right? It's powerful. It's about making a decision. It's about transformation. It's about life changing. And it has like a really deep piece of emotional, I don't know, a shard of emotion that can be like, I don't know, really deeply specific, right? And it is the intention by the artist is that this piece describes that somehow. Now, I think you see emotional experiences, or sorry, these mini emotional experiences, these like universal fantasies, if you will, in music a lot. My hypothesis about Taylor Swift is that one of the reasons that she is as popular as she is because her music is basically one universal fantasy after another. It is one mini emotional experience after another. And these miniature emotional experiences, of course, can be combined to create much bigger emotional experiences, right? Shake it off, literally just that one line, especially when put in the context of breaking up, is a really specific emotional experience that not everybody, but most people have experienced in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're talking about shaking off and moving forward from a breakup, or from a friend betraying you, or from a bad day, right? Like this idea of being able to just shake it off is something that a lot of people can resonate with. I don't know Taylor Swift's music well enough, I'm sorry, to trying to remember more. But if you go and you look at her music, I feel like there's one about I wear short sneakers, she wears short skirts, she's cheer captain and I'm on the bleachers thinking of the, okay, this is bad. Don't ask me. But again, another universal fantasy is that sense of being isolated, a sense of looking in and wanting something, the sense of looking outward and seeing that another person in your life represents something that you don't necessarily like, and but that everybody else likes and you don't understand, and there's this like a mini emotional experience of not understanding why everybody's finds this so interesting or appealing when you're like, but like, what? Right? Feeling like you understand something, an inherent truth that nobody else understands, right? That's a mini emotional experience. And I'm sure there's like tons and tons of ways that you could interpret it. So don't get me wrong. So music, yes, lyrics, poetry, I think really gets at these sort of universal fantasies, these mini emotional experiences, and fiction as well. So one example that I just thought of off the top of my head, because I don't plan for these, other than like I brought my show and tell, um, is I don't know if you've ever read the book Emily of New Moon by L.M. Montgomery. She wrote Anne of Green Gables. So in Emily of New Moon, in the beginning of the story, her dad dies and she ends up going to live with some aunts, and it's kind of a coming of age story of a young woman. I think probably early 1900s sort of time frame. Um, and it starts off when she's like a little girl, like she's maybe 10 or 11 at the beginning of the story. And the first few chapters is just like description, basically. Her dad is sick. She's got like a grouchy housekeeper, a big fat cat, and she has the property around her house. And one of the things that happens, and I can barely even tell you what happens in this story as a whole, because I've read the first three chapters like 50 times, but I've only read the book itself like twice. But in the first few chapters, one of the things that she does is she runs around in the fields, and it's kind of wintry and cold and blustery. It's set in Canada. Um, and she describes the trees who were her friends, and she describes the wind, and she has just this very beautiful, imaginative experience with the world around her, and it's the result of what's going on inside her own head. And as a child and as an adult, her way of seeing the world really resonated with me because it was the same way of me seeing this the world. And so like I read it a bunch as a teenager, and then I went back because I was like teaching a workshop or something. Because I was like, oh, there must be like a single sentence or like a paragraph or something that I can quote that really gets at this emotional experience that I have when reading these chapters. And I went back through and I read it, and I couldn't find any. I couldn't find any single sentence. I couldn't find any single paragraph. I couldn't find any one thing that really like identified that emotional experience that I was having. And the reason is because it was a universal fantasy that was woven into the story itself in like a really like deep and meaningful way to me as a child, but also to me as an adult. So it's not about being pithy in many cases. It's not about being, brief. It's not about, being quotable. It's about having specific emotional experiences and finding ways to embed them into the story in addition to the story, but sometimes regardless of the story. Um, I think there's a concept for this. I can't remember the name of it. But something certain writers, particularly in cozier genres, tend to do is they are including what some editors are calling like extraneous scenes, where it's just a scene of characters sitting around the table, not discussing anything in particular. It doesn't really move the plot forward. It's just like a tableau, kind of like it's just a scene. And there are a lot of editors who would tell you to cut that out because it's like not necessary. It's extraneous and it reduces the tension or whatever. But you can make the opposite argument that what they're doing is embedding really specific emotional experiences into the story, where it's like, oh, I am embedding this emotional experience of warmth, comfort, family, and connection by having this scene of a family sitting around a table, right? Um, and I think it's really worth thinking about. I think it's really worth understanding this idea of the fantasies. One of the ways that I've really come to understand it is just by paying attention to how I feel when I'm consuming a story, whether it's listening to a song that I like or watching a TV show or reading a book. A lot of times I can just be like, oh, wow, that felt nice. That's it. Doesn't have to be a specific feeling. And then being like, what felt nice about it? Why did it feel nice? What felt engaging? What felt interesting? What intrigued me? What pulled me in? And being able to kind of pinpoint exactly what those emotional experiences are. Now, really interesting use case if you want to do some research. The TV show Jack Reacher. I don't know if there's more than one season. I only watched one, but I think it's on Prime. It is literally nothing but dude universal fantasies, one right after another, after another, after another. It's so specific too sometimes. It's like, here, I can just, I don't even remember the plot of the season, but I can give you a list of universal's fantasies that are embedded in that TV show off the top of my head. Being big, but like fit, not like too big, but like the right amount of big. Muscles, broad shoulders, tall, imposing. Being able to walk into a room and having everyone be a little bit afraid of you, but also inherently trust you. Like, as a woman, if a big dude like Jack Reacher walked into a room, I might probably be anxious or like a little afraid, uh, and not inherently trusting of him. But in Jack Reacher, it's a kind of like a nice balance of being like, I intimidate all of the right people, but everybody else inherently trusts me. And it's kind of like magic. It doesn't really happen in real life. What is it? It's like I intimidate the bad guys, but the good guys trust me implicitly. There's a scene where this dude sits down and just eats like 5,000 calories of food in one sitting. And it's contrasted with another guy who just eats a salad. And I think that's a universal fantasy, being able to look like Jack Reacher and eat whatever you want. In addition, the vigilante sort of universal fantasy of like being able to break the law and be right about it. 100% morally, ethically correct, even though you're breaking the law and you're doing all kinds of things that in real life you would never be allowed to do. These are all like really specific universal fantasy. That's why I don't really like the term universal, because these aren't fantasies that I necessarily have. But they're fantasies that are like embedded in storytelling, like all over the place. And so I think they're really easy to see in Jack Reacher. I think they're really blatant. They're not subtle at all. And I think it's one of the reasons that people probably like not just the TV show, but also like the books. I haven't read the books, of course, so I don't know if it's the same, but I would guess it probably is. Anyway, it's worth looking at what sorts of mini experiences you have. You know, what sorts of mini experiences do stories give you? What sorts of mini experiences do you seek out in your life? You know, I think these are interesting questions, and more interesting even in the context of like storytelling. That's probably enough on universal fantasies for today. I have lots of thoughts. I did want to point out my earrings. I sent Josh to Walmart to buy me a bunch of cheap fancy earrings, and this is what he came home with. And I think he did a great job. I like them a lot. He also came home with a bunch of studs, so I filled all of my earring holes today. I have 5 currently. I used to have more like 8 or 9, but I let them close. I used to have 3 down here. That's 6, and then 1 up here, and then I had 1 up here. So that's 8. So yeah, I used to have 8, but these ones just kept getting caught on my hair constantly. It really annoyed me. And then these ones, I don't know. I never, one got infected and closed. And so I kept it open on the other side for a while. I don't remember which. And then eventually I was just like, why am I even, how often do I wear earrings? It's like, I like work from home and I don't go anywhere and I don't do anything. So, now I just have 5. I know. So few. I really should go get some more piercings. Anyway. Oh, it's time for my new sign off. Hang on, I have to look at it because I have to memorize this. Are you ready? What's up with this ChatGPT? Okay, I had to edit this a little bit, but here we go. In the muck, we've had our fun, but now this swamp hag's day is done. ChatGPT came up with a bunch of rhymes for me, so I'll probably use more on future videos just because they're funny. So anyway, for the time being, happy, I don't even know what day it is. This is what happens when you have surgery and you're on painkillers and you're sitting around all the time. Like, time just ceases to have any meaning whatsoever. Anyway, happy Saturday. I just asked the cat. She says it's Saturday, so we're gonna take her word for it. All right, happy Saturday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And let me know if you see any universal fantasies that you think are particularly interesting, or if you have any questions. I could talk about this for a long time. Anyway, this swamp hag's day is done. It's like not even true because it's like 11 o'clock in the morning right now. So I do have to come up with a better sign off. See you later, swampigator. Okay, I'm done, I swear. Happy Saturday.